Dr. Adam Little is a veterinarian, but also uniquely a graduate of Singularity University. That sounds like something out of Star Wars, doesn't it? But it's actually a Silicon Valley-based institution focused on exploring and understanding exponential technologies and their impact on our world. He's acted as an advisor to the Canadian Veterinary Medical Association on telemedicine. He's president of a consultancy called Exponential Vet, which helps the veterinary profession harness disruptive technologies, and has recently become director of the Innovation and Entrepreneurship Center at Texas A&M University. By way of contrast, he's also spent time working in remote villages of Tanzania for the Chief Veterinary Officer of the Canadian government, working on how technology can address food security and animal health issues. So I'm delighted to introduce you, Adam, to RCVS Day and discover how you think our profession can best prepare itself for the changes to come.
I first want to start by thanking Bradley and the entire RCVS community for inviting me here to speak to you today. I recall my first conversation with Bradley, and I remember leaving it thinking, I'm not sure if this person thinks I'm crazy or if we're going to end up talking again, so it's a pleasure for me to be here. I also wanted to recognize, I think, the work that's gone in to the Vet Futures initiative in laying some of the groundwork for the conversation that we're going to have this afternoon. I think it's important to recognize the efforts that this group is put forward into looking into the future when others that I've spoken to aren't even open to that conversation. And last, I really want to recognize and just express how honored and privileged I am to share the stage with today's award winners. It goes without saying that we've benefited greatly from the pioneering work of veterinarians all over the world. And what we're going to do today is expand a little bit upon that and share how in the future we're going to leverage technology to deliver an unprecedented value and level of care. But before I get started, I want to share a very personal story and explain a little bit about why I do what I do and why I'm so passionate about it. So this is the story of Jewel. Jewel was a yellow lab. She was my family dog. And you can see from day one when we brought her home, she was very intelligent. She knew exactly who was going to be taking care of her for the majority of her life. And my brothers and I, grew up with this animal. And again, when she was smart, she would always look and see where Mom was and the role that my mom played in her life and how important that relationship was. And because I have two younger brothers and we're all obnoxious and loud, we dress her up. Jewel became the best child in the family, so to speak. Like all animals, Jewel got older. And I remember vividly on October 27th, 2011, I got a call from my mom. And I was at vet school at the time, but I knew that Jewel had been dealing with congestive heart failure. And she was having some good days and some bad days. And my mom would occasionally call me and ask, is this normal? Should this be going on? And I got it, but ultimately, it wasn't nearly as perfect or elegant solution as my mom would have appreciated. And so when I got that call, I knew something was a little bit up. And I rushed home to find that Jewel was really struggling to breathe. She wasn't doing well. And ultimately, as we began to pack up the brothers to get home, Jewel collapsed, and she died in our family room. But I remember going back to school and thinking two very specific things. The first was that my mom loved that dog. She spent every single waking moment with that dog. And how was it that a woman who cared so deeply about this animal had such a lack of awareness and understanding about the condition that ultimately would take her life? And why was that considered to be acceptable? And then on the flip side, I thought about our veterinarian, a person who had been with our family for the entirety of Jewel's life, who was a great veterinarian, who really cared about that animal. And the next time he was going to hear from my mom, it would be about the fact that the dog had passed away at home. And that really stuck with me because there is a ton of progress that we have made as a profession. But in a lot of ways, the foundation, the model of care, hasn't evolved nearly as much as we'd like to think. It's still very generic. We're just beginning to understand, breed differences and dispositions and how that impacts care. It's reactive. We're waiting for that phone call. We're waiting for that person to come in the door. And to a lot of people today, it's inaccessible. Not just to people like my mom in her time of need, but to communities all over the world where we have tools and solutions for animal health problems that today are unaffordable or too inconvenient to access. And so a lot of times when people talk about the role of technology, it can be very scary. It can make you very uneasy and nervous. But what I'm going to lay out today, I believe, is a future where the veterinary profession can reach a level of care, of value, that we never thought was really possible. And I'm going to try and create a conversation today where I think that we can begin to build towards that future to deliver much more fulfilling careers, diverse careers for our entire profession, but ultimately better serve the people and animals that we care about. So let's take it back a little bit. This is a photo from the early 1900s, and much like that quote in that conference, there was actually another really important conference that happened about this time. It was the first ever International Urban Planning Conference. And at that time, a whole bunch of people came together to talk about the future of cities. And one issue rose to the top. It was the projected rise of horse manure. They were sitting around the table and they said, based on our projections on the way that cities are going to grow, we are going to be overrun with horse manure. The streets are going to be dominated by it. It's going to be a transportation and public health crisis. But ultimately, that didn't happen, right? Because automobiles changed the way that we think about that problem. What you may not know is that at that time, in the 1900s, about 80% of the work was done exclusively on horses. And by 1920, that number had dropped to 20%. It took one technology about 20 years to fundamentally change our profession. It led to the creation of the companion animal practice as we know it today. And what I'm going to lay out are other game-changing technologies that I think are going to force us and propel us to really look at the ways in which we treat animals differently. Now, this is what this looks like today, right? This is a photo of two different conclaves, not a ton of time apart. You can notice one of the early adopters in the top photo. 2013, everybody has these devices. Now, that might seem impressive, but I think what's more interesting is that each person in that photo has access to more information than Bill Clinton did as president. They also have access to all these things. Devices, equipment, things that used to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars are now merely apps on our phone. They used to occupy rooms. And it's not just us, but anybody in the world now has access to these tools. And it's fundamentally shifting the way that we think about creating companies and creating technologies to a much more democratized way. Kodak is probably the best example of a technology and a company that really struggled with this. And in Singularity, they talk about the Ds to help describe these types of phenomena. Now, in 1996, Kodak had a market cap of tens of billions of dollars. They employed over 100,000 people. And by 2012, they were bankrupt. Right? They had a business that was built on photography, but more importantly, was built on the analog processes of photography, ink, paper, the processing. And as that technology became digitized, all the work and all the effort that went into making that photo sort of changed and became less and less relevant. It was now becoming an issue of what do you do with the photos? How do you store them? How do you share them? Suddenly, it didn't cost any more money to take a photograph. We don't even think about this anymore, but there was a time, I remember vividly standing at Niagara Falls and my dad had 4 photos left on his camera. He took a family photo, someone walked by, and he almost threw the camera at the person. We don't even think about it now. We just hold down the button, and then we realize that we have 100 photos on our phone, none of which we're probably going to see again. So it changes the problem space quite considerably. Now everybody who has a camera or who has a phone has a camera. You don't need to buy or build or borrow big pieces of machinery anymore to have those high-quality photos. Now, on top of that, this process was deceptive to the biggest company in the world at the time in photography, and ultimately they were disrupted. Now, interestingly enough, that same year, a mobile app with 15 employees that was built on top of digital photography was acquired for over $1 billion. Instagram. Here's the rub. Kodak invented the digital camera. And at the time, it was big, and it was bulky, and it was expensive. And when you look at the history of that company, and you sit around that CEO's table and the executive table, they were looking at this technology and thinking, well, you know, we have all this infrastructure, we have all these assets. This isn't going to be a big thing, right? This isn't going to change our business too much. Maybe we'll get into it. Maybe we'll build some special cameras, but no one's going to replace their camera with this hunk of junk. Today, that camera, 1,000 times better, it's 1,000 times lighter, it's 1,000 times cheaper. It's a billion-fold improvement in a few short decades. And as Nick said, we're seeing this again and again and again. When you actually look at the growth of photography, it took off. It's not that people stopped taking photos. In fact, they took a lot more photos. And it really shifted the problem space because, as I described, up until that point, all the money was being made in processing and supporting those customers. And now all the money and all the interest and all the energies put into storing those photos, sharing them, using them to identify different faces when you tag a friend on Facebook. The diversity of applications completely explode. And we're seeing this again and again across different industries, right? Blockbuster to Netflix, Uber and taxis, Airbnb and hotels. And this isn't just a coincidence. You know, Singularity looked at a concept called Moore's Law. And there's a reason why the phones in your pocket are more powerful than a supercomputer was a short, 30, 40 years ago. And it's the fact that each 12 to 18 months, you're getting about 2 times better computing processing power for about the same cost. And it's on this exponential doubling curve. And Ray Kurzweil, one of the co-founders of Singularity, found out that any technology that becomes information-enabled jumps on that exponential curve. And so in the beginning, it's very subtle, and it seems difficult. But then it explodes. Now, when we look at computers, right, this has a fraction of the computing power as this, which is now the size of your fingertip, powering all our devices. I love this quote from Peter Diamandis, one of the other co-founders of Singularity. All the transistors in the world, only a couple of years ago, were sold in iPhones during one of the recent launches. But it's not just those heavy technologies. The cost of genomic sequencing is another great example of this, where for a number of years, as they were looking at the Human Genome Project, people were really questioning, could we get this done? It's costing a lot of money, it's taking a lot of time. But as we know, the cost of this is also dropping at that same rate. So we've gone from something that used to cost $1 billion to do, which was never going to happen. That's not a common thing. If it costs $1 billion, we don't get our genome sequenced. If it costs $100 million, we don't have that information. If it costs $1,000, $100, $1, all of a sudden we start having to figure out how do we work with this information. And as veterinary practitioners, we start having to ask some interesting questions to ourselves. What are the potential applications of that technology? And how can we deliver more personalized care because of it? But that's difficult to appreciate. So here's another way to sort of visualize what it feels like to jump on that exponential curve. This is a grandmother stepping in her son's autopilot for Tesla not a long time ago.
Just put me back from me controlling. Oh dear Jesus, I could never. Oh, where's it going? God damn, Bill. Oh my God. Oh, this is so scary.
That's the way that we felt when we stepped in elevators for the first time. Because it does feel crazy. And it does feel disruptive and uncomfortable. And so today we're going to walk through what that means for us as a profession. So we have not navigated the evolution of the internet well as a profession. Right? There's still a lot of conflict, a lot of friction that's created because today the internet is seen as a divide between you and your clients and your stakeholders for a lot of different sort of cases. And so we haven't really developed a model that embraces that as a profession. We dread, as a profession, the clients that walk in with a stack of Google search results. It's not something that we like to see. Now, today the internet is a collection of devices, right? We have our phones, we have our cars, we have our computers. But what we're seeing is this concept of the Internet of Things, where different types of objects that otherwise have never been connected before are now sharing information between themselves and communicating to services all over the world. You know, it's our fridges, it's our watches, it's our air conditioning systems. And what we're seeing is that today, while there's about 9 billion connected devices, within the next 5 years, there's going to be 50. And then by 2025, we move to about 500 billion. By 2030, you're at 1 trillion. And so it's not just these big, bulky devices where we're logging in and clicking buttons and trying to, dial up to the internet, but the seamless connection of information between different types of devices is really changing the way in which we work and the way in which we understand our world. And we're not immune from it. Already in the last couple of years, we've seen the explosion of animal wearable companies in areas of reproductive health for farm animals, for performance wearables for equine applications. There's been a dozen different companion animal wearables measuring everything from behavior to activity. And what we're finding more and more is that we live in a world in which it's no longer what can be possible, but what types of information do we really want to gather? This is a really good example. This is a story of an individual who was a cat owner who had a cat that got sick. And he brought it into the clinic, and by the time the clinic had seen that animal, it was too late. And he went back as an engineer and thought, how could this be the case? I love my animal. Why is it that I didn't see this coming? What could I have been looking for? And he went out and designed a smart litter box, which today measures things like frequency, weight of the animal, weight of the material, length of time, and he put it on the internet. And apparently a lot of other people had that problem as well, because he was able to, through some of these crowdfunding mechanisms, raise tens of thousands of dollars to support that device. And so when you think of all the ecosystem of products in the world of an animal, food bowls, leashes, water bowls, the doggy door, we are living in a world in which those are going to become connected. And it's going to get connected in the same way that we think about cameras and phones. It's just there. Today, if you go to look for a phone that doesn't have a camera, you're going to be walking around for a pretty long time. And so today, while these devices are bigger and more expensive, they're hitting this trajectory in which they're radically dropping in price, condensing in size, and improving in functionality. This is another example. This is a company called Petnostics. What they have is a urine cup. Pet owner goes out, put a cup under, gather the sample, take a picture of the lid, sends the information automatically to the pet owner's phone. They have the option of sharing it with the veterinarian. Now, this device today you can buy $10 on Amazon. They've already sold 10,000 kits in the last couple of years. But this is a really interesting example of, I think, some of the friction and at the same time a lack of really a pathway for these types of innovations. So this is the founder of the company on Shark Tank, and I want you to listen to the questions that the judges ask.
Is it a cost saving over going to a vet?
Initially, this proof of concept that we have, we thought the check engine light was going to be a very valuable proposition.
Well, the difference is the check engine light is passive. In your case, there's got to be an action that caused me to go stick my hand under my dog while he's peeing.
We realized that the impetus to put it under is if the vet tells you to do so.
So it's vet-driven.
We definitely want to go the vet route.
The problem is my vet wants me to bring my animal in as many times as
Well,
I
you have
possibly
to
can.
do that too,
Why is my
right?
vet going to give me this really convenient thing so I don't have to charge you anymore? Here, take this.
Yeah.
Yeah. All these devices are sort of grappling with the reality that there is health information that's being generated as they're going through this process. They're grappling with the fact that veterinarians, and people know veterinarians have value in these equations, but they're also grappling with the fact that today working with veterinary clinics, discussing technology, evolving the business models is a very difficult conversation. And so you're seeing more and more companies like this really having to focus on who are the people that I can reach, who I can serve via my technology. And we need to figure out new ways in which we can collaborate with these groups because the information that's being generated is going to transform the way that we think about animal health. You know, it's no longer going to be a stack of paper from Google search results. That stack of paper is going to be that animal. And we're going to have to figure out how we work in that future. And it's not just these, seemingly retail-oriented products. There's solutions like this. This is a pill cam. It's taking the capabilities of an endoscopic procedure and putting it in a camera in a pill that gets ingested by the animal. Takes 360-degree photos, goes to the intestinal tract, comes out the other side. And so there's, even within the veterinary profession, work that's being done in these big specialty hospitals now reaches a point where perhaps there's things that we can do in areas that don't have the same level of expertise or potentially the same amount of equipment. When we look at the genome and the microbiome, over-the-counter kits are already available. And what I want to show is me. This is my 23andMe report. Take a cheek swab, provides me with information about the conditions, connects me to other people who have similar types of results. Today, my doctor doesn't have this information. Today, it's up to me to figure out what's important and what I want to act on. I want to draw you to one specific metric, which I think is appropriate for right now. I'm at high risk for atrial fibrillation, which is not great when you're the person speaking. But it's the idea that, well, we want this sort of connected world where our health is being personalized based on this information. There's still many gaps that exist between the people that can deliver that care and the people that are receiving that information. On the animal health side, there was the launch of a similar company called Embark that's looking at over 100 different genetic conditions. Cheek swab, less than $200, providing that information to owners. And one of the things that they're grappling with is how do we get this information to veterinarians? How do we work with it? How do they want to visualize it? And veterinarians are saying, I've never seen this information before. I went to school for 4 years. I've been practicing for 2 decades. This is new to me. And so the way that we learn about information and how we incorporate it, that pathway is getting radically condensed. And I think it has profound implications for the way that we talk about learning and training for veterinarians. This is another example. From a biotechnology standpoint, the ability to personalize care, it's not just providing people with information about their genetics, but the ability to actually go in and make edits. This technology called CRISPR basically took that and made it far more precise and far more affordable. And so we're entering a world where in the next, coming 10 years, we're going to be able to start making some significant adjustments to the code of life of our patients. And you think back, just as a thought exercise, how many cases have you seen that the breed or the genetic predisposition was the root of that case? And what would happen to veterinary practices if that wasn't the case? There's already companies out there that are beginning to use these tools to do things like create hornless cows. There's definitely companies that are looking to target specific genetic conditions and figure out if we might be able to offer more personalized and precise care and treatment of those conditions. the ability to then take that animal's information and use tools like 3D printing, not just to produce anatomical structures, but tissues that are perfectly positioned and anatomically correct for different procedures. There's already cases in human medicine and veterinary medicine of people printing surgical implants, and there's companies even today that are beginning to use this technology to produce leather. High quality leather without the use of animals. And so, when you look at all the ways in which data is being created and how we're going to use that to deliver more personalized care, it gets a little bit overwhelming. But I believe that there's some incredible opportunities for new ways in which we might create roles for veterinarians. And I want to highlight a specific case. This is Darby. Darby is a dog that had a congenital limb deformity, otherwise was going to be euthanized. They tried a couple of the off-the-shelf solutions, but unfortunately for that dog, it wasn't appropriate. One of the owners of the dog was a program manager at a 3D printing company. I think you know where this is going. They designed Darby a new set of wheels, so to speak. This is Darby today. Those attachments have been perfectly designed for that animal. The cost of complexity in that process is free. The cost of printing that, orders of magnitude less than that cart, and getting cheaper. The materials are getting better. And so we're seeing different point examples of technology beginning to seep into the veterinary profession. And it's really changing the way that we think about the role of the vets moving forward. Now, there's already companies now that are 3D printing pills. Imagine a world in which a disease is identified in a developing country, sequenced there, diagnosed there, the information sent digitally to a central lab, the CDC in Atlanta. They send the digital recipe back to the developing country and press the pill or the injection or the vaccine to be shared with the farmers or the care providers. You know, when we look at 2030, that future isn't so far-fetched anymore because this is what we have today. There's already companies that are beginning to put sensors into those pills to figure out if they're being taken. Or what they'll do is they'll put multiple days worth of medication, then use the sensors to release the exact amount of medication and dose necessary for that day. So we're in a profession where we're still trying to figure out how to build apps to get people to log in and put their information in that they took their dog's heartworm or they took that preventative medication. And these are companies and their approach and how they're solving that same sort of issue. And while this sounds really exciting, the reality is that the world that we see here is radically different than the one that clinicians are experiencing today. This isn't an elegant solution. When you talk to clinicians, both on the human and the veterinary side, this is what they say. This information's difficult. I don't know how to understand it. What do I do with it? And so I want to take a second to talk about how we're going to work with this information in the future. Computers and crowds and the ways in which we're currently deploying these types of technologies to help us understand that data. It's hard to believe, but this was a computer. These were computers. That was the title of the job. Primarily women at that time would sit in desks and do calculations. And that process was expensive and tedious and inefficient. And today the capabilities of that task force are now condensed into a single Excel cell in the spreadsheet. This is the next generation of it, right? I still remember my dad, an engineering student who bought a calculator for about $200 at the time, lost it on his first day of school, and had to wait 3 months before he could buy a new one. As an engineering student, you kind of need that calculator. Today, when I want to get an image of a newer calculator, Google gives me a calculator for free before I even know that I need one. We've gone in 100 years from a room like this of people typing or people using handwriting to solve math problems to a point where everybody now has access to these tools. And it's not just math. This is a very famous chess game, Garry Kasparov versus IBM's Deep Blue. Everybody thought Garry Kasparov as a world champion was going to win. IBM comes along and beats him in the series. And at that time, that computer cost millions and millions of dollars, required lots of people to operate. And today, for free, on my phone, I have an app that can beat the world's best chess player. But the human plus the computer still beats the computer, which I think is really important. It wasn't just chess, though. This is IBM's sort of evolution of this tool.
Please make a selection.
I've never said this on TV. Chicks dig me for 200, please, Jimmy.
Kathleen Kenyon's excavation of this city, mentioned in Joshua, showed the walls had been repaired 17 times. Watson.
What is Jericho?
Correct.
400, same category.
So that's Watson. And that was close to 5 years ago now, where they created a computer. They fed it, Wikipedia, the works of William Shakespeare, and put it against the world's best Jeopardy players. And it beat them. And it's not just Jeopardy or chess. It's the idea that the underlying tools that enable that type of power are now being unlocked, not just to very specific practitioners, but to a world in which people can collaborate and build on top of them. In the last 2 years alone, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and IBM have released online tools that allow people to take this type of power and put it in the hands of their customers or in their domains. And now you look at people all over the world, much like those people in the Vatican City, now have access to that type of power. This was another game that was played this year. Google's DeepMind, which is sort of their equivalent, played a game of Go. And something really interesting happened. In the second game of the 5-game match, the computer made a really, really strange move. In fact, a move that is so strange that if another human was to do it, you'd think that the human was a really terrible player. And ultimately, the computer won that game against the world's best Go player. And afterwards, they were talking about that move, and they were asking the competitor, and they asked him what he thought. And he thought it was beautiful. It was a move so beautiful because the computer at that stage was thinking so much further ahead about the game. In game 4, the human made a beautiful move. And so we kind of live in a world today where when people talk about technology, they see it as very sterile. They see it as somehow disconnecting us or disintermediating us from the world in which we live. But for a lot of people, technology is a gateway. And it can be creative. And that's really important not to lose. Then we look at crowds. There's so many tools already available for people to harness the fact that billions of people are connected, whether you need capital, access to talent, access to resources, access to ideas. These are some of my favorite ones. There's a company right now, and they're crowdsourcing vision for the blind. And so you can imagine if you're a blind individual walking into a pantry and picking up a can, understanding if you have the right can or jar is still like a very difficult problem. And so now with their tool, you press a button, and you're connected to somebody in real time who can describe what you're seeing. In areas of the world where access to equipment is very difficult, harnessing the crowd to crowd share and source really expensive pieces of machinery. Tractors, for example, for farmers in Kenya and Tanzania. This is a company called Soylent. They've made a meal replacement solution. And the impetus of this was a programmer who was tired of having to take breaks from programming and working to go eat. And he found that when he was doing that, he would eat a lot of crappy food. He would come back tired. It was expensive. So he created a formula called Soylent, which was a total meal replacement, which you might think 10, 20 years ago is like literally the secret formula. But what did he do? He open sourced it. And with that, a community of people built around his recipe to change it, alter it, improve upon it. He still has been selling this like hotcakes, but the way in which they think about their businesses is changing as a result. This is another great story. Protein folding today is still very difficult for computers to do. They're not perfect at it. So some researchers at MIT created a game called Fold It. They turned the process of predicting different protein orientations into a game that had 57,000 players. That was found to be better than the computers in understanding how molecules work together. And you would think that the best player of that game would be a researcher or maybe somebody who created the game. But they found when they were digging into their community, at the top of the leaderboard,
was an executive assistant from London, who by night was the world's best protein folder. And so we look at these worlds where in our practices, in our organizations, we think that we have the best people. But when you can connect to billions, tens of thousands of other veterinarians, we can't. And the leading organizations are finding again and again that being able to harness people external to your organization is actually very critical to your success. One such example in the veterinary space is a work that the Austin Animal Shelter is doing. There's a community group called Kaggle. It's a data science community where you get data science practitioners to compete in competitions. So you put out your data set and you say, I have this problem, and they crowdsource that problem to a number of data scientists. Right now, they're using this to try and understand why animals end up in shelters. And if your purpose of a veterinarian is trying to provide health care to animals that get relinquished, and that's your sole purpose, the ability to have tools like this, or your role in developing tools like this, is really important and can be incredibly fulfilling. This is another great example. Microsoft, just because they could, decided to create, I'm pretty sure on a Tuesday or Wednesday afternoon, a breed identifier app. So today you can actually download this, you take a picture, it it identifies your breed. We talk about compliance for recommendations and how owners don't understand when they adopt the bulldog that the bulldog has all these conditions. What are some new ways in which we can engage owners on that information and the ways in which they want to be engaged? And what out-of-the-box tools are already there? Because computers are helping take that massive information and make it more actionable and understandable. It's coming to areas like pathology. This is a company we work with out of Israel. They're digitizing microscopy at a price point of less than a manual microscope with a device that could sit on your desk, that is able to produce images like this quality in real time, that gives you a link that you could share to other people and get access to expertise on. But it's really interesting when you look at that bridging of crowds and computer intelligence, they're actually helping experts identify areas of interest quicker. And so on this side, they've asked an expert to identify white blood cells. And then on the other side of the slide, they've asked the computer, based on that information and training, to pick those out as well. And then they serve it up in a report like this. Now, it's not perfect, obviously. There's some areas that the computer thought were white blood cells that they aren't. So you click and you drag it down, but then the computer learns that's not a white blood cell. It took someone without a science background 2 weeks to build that algorithm using some of the tools that I've talked about. And it was around 95% accurate on the first try. And so we live in a world today where if you want help as a veterinarian with diagnostic information, A, you have to get buy-in of maybe hundreds of dollars to be able to ship that sample to another veterinarian. There's a couriering cost, there's the turnaround time. You get it back, they're clearly not in the clinic anymore, so you call them. So you have to really select when it is that you get that support. In a future like this, you click a button and you can get a parasitologist for 15 seconds to identify specific areas of interest. And so we might move into a world in which you don't have to make that decision whether or not to have that level of collaboration. And so when you look at the quality of care that we can practice, what if for every decision you were making in practice, you had access to the world's best experts with the information that they needed to make that decision, with a business model where those experts could actually be compensated for their time? This is a recent report that came out, I think last week, where they're using this type of machine learning capabilities to help with Alzheimer's diagnoses. And so across all areas of medicine, you're seeing these collisions between technology companies and medical companies looking to say, what tools do you have available that can help us solve these really big problems? And these companies are saying, what problems do you have that we can use our tools for? And we need to be able to create that conversation in our space as well. Because what it's going to enable is a new type of care delivery model, one that's much more on demand, where you're getting the perfect person for that perfect conversation as a pet owner and as a veterinarian. We think of telemedicine like this today, where it's a Skype conversation, you open up your laptop or your phone, and this is growing still very quickly. People really like this. In the veterinary space, we're seeing lots of companies begin to offer these sorts of services. Right? We started with the text-based exchanges where people were going on to the Ask Jeeves-like websites, and that was been going on for over 10 years. Then you moved into these models where people could talk to a vet in real time via FaceTime. Then you start to have things like the Uber model where I can deliver a vet to your home at any time. This is a company called Vet Pronto that's doing that out of California. And right now these models are very competitive with clinics. And I think we need to figure out which advantages these tools can provide to support and enable the practices that we do have, because they're often very complementary. Right? If I get a call, let's say I'm a telemedicine practitioner. I'm not seeing the patients. I don't have access to their medical record. If they actually do need to see a vet, I can't offer that. And at the same time, the client's saying, I'm looking for information to guide my consultation with my in-clinic practitioner. But when I go there, they have no idea that I've had this conversation. They have no idea about the information that you provided. They don't understand I've already spent $10, $15 talking to you, and that's not reflected in the cost. And then the practitioner is saying, okay, here we go. Another person coming in with preconceived notions about the health of their animal. This is going to be a very difficult appointment. That model doesn't work. Nobody wins in that model. But what I'm presenting is an opportunity to look at these tools and figure out how we can use them to deliver new types of practice models that are far more holistic in nature and support clients from a variety of perspectives in a much more connected way. We talked about the bridging of crowds and computer intelligence, and this is happening across a variety of fields. In travel, in fitness, and in law, you have today chat messaging apps, which are a combination of humans and artificial intelligence guiding people through conversations, whether it's booking a trip, understanding your wearable data, or, and this is my favorite, an individual, one guy, built a messaging app that fights parking tickets. He launched it. Guess how many tickets that he's fought? 190,000. With a 60% success rate. Already millions of dollars in which he saved for people with parking tickets. And that wasn't even a tough computer program. It took it was one guy. And so we look at the value that we're able to extract from all these tools, and I think one of the problems that we have today is that veterinarians love living in this world. In a lot of ways, we love the fact that we can, press a button and get the car, book a hotel room, fight a parking ticket. But when our clients do that, that's not a good thing. I'm perfectly okay to go to Dr. Google and look at my own health, but if you do that for your animal, we don't like that too much. And it's because the way in which we built these models today, it makes it very difficult to be able to work with those tools. Now, this is a company that I advise called Treat, and what they've done is they've combined that messaging capability with the ability to offer those services and created this sort of conversational commerce model that other businesses are deploying as well. Where now, touch a button, food comes tomorrow. Touch a button, the medication is delivered tomorrow. If you need to access veterinary services, they can provide those in home too. But again, when their clients need to go to see a veterinarian, the veterinarian is incentivized to keep that client. They've never heard of Treat. They don't really want you using Treat, regardless of the benefits that you might have. And so we're still seeing some of these frictions in the early days here. When I talk about that connecting to a specialist, this is a great example of this. This is a company called CellScope. They ship parents iPhone cases that enable them to take images and videos of their child's ear canal. They have an application which guides you through the structures that you need to take a video or picture of, and then they send that information to a specialist who in real time jumps on a consultation for you and with you. And so that sort of hybrid between the human expertise and experience with the ability to empower patients is really attractive because it lowers costs, makes things more efficient, and at the same time has the connectivity back to the practitioners. And that's just today, right? Today, those experiences today are still fairly disjointed. They're still two-dimensional. We're living in a world in which augmented and virtual reality technology is evolving incredibly quickly. The ability to put on a headset and get instantly transformed into a virtual world. I'll tell you guys a quick story. I was at Stanford's virtual reality lab, and they have this big area sitting down. And you walk into this room with a group of 5 people. And one of you puts on the headset, and the rest of you people sort of watch. And you're wearing this headset, and the first thing they do is they recreate the room that you're in. So it's kind of the same room, but your friends are all gone. Then they ask you to turn, and they drop the floor underneath you. And there's a plank that you're now on. And they ask you to walk across the plank. And it's so authentic that you're walking like this. And it's hilarious because as somebody who's on the outside, you're watching your friend literally walking on carpet like this. And then they ask you to take a turn and take a step off the beam. And 50% of their participants don't do it because they're that scared. And the other 50% of participants that do actually fall because their bodies think that they're falling. And that was 3 years ago that we experienced that. You know, I've had the opportunity to fly in virtual reality, and it is cool. I can't wait to the opportunities when we can actually do surgery in virtual reality, not just the sense of presence, but really the sense of touch. We look at these areas and we think they're veterinary-specific challenges, but there's literally dozens of companies right now that are trying to recreate every sense that we have as humans in virtual environments. This is another example. This is more augmented reality. So the difference there is that in augmented reality, it's the world in which you live, but they're layering in information on top of it. This is a demo of Microsoft's HoloLens, a person wearing the headset, and they're literally going around creating screens in their house. And so this world in which we're all looking at our phones walking into walls, that's not going to be the future. Today, those headsets are big and bulky and expensive, just like car phones were, just like printers were, just like every aspect of technology was. But there's already companies today that are looking at consolidating that into glasses and eventually contact lenses. You know, just to illustrate this, we've come a long way. I think that's where I got my first phone. These ones were too expensive. Augmented reality and virtual reality in healthcare alone is going to become about $2.5 billion in the coming years of a huge content industry that will be billions and billions of dollars. And I'll show you a couple of videos. This is a company called Magic Leap. They're doing augmented reality. They haven't released a product. They're incredibly secretive. They've raised over $1.5 billion in funding. From the people that have participated in some of their demos, it's the most mind-blowing experience in the world, but I want to show you some of what they've shared. So right now you're probably wearing glasses. It's popping up information around you. One of the investors in this company told a story of when he got there. They had him to put on glasses, sit down, and there was 2 cups of coffee. And they asked him to grab the real one. And he got it wrong. So you're living in a world in which we talk about how information today, which is, you know, very time-consuming to interpret, very difficult to access, it's not just that one field's evolving right now. They're all evolving and converging at the same time. This is another example. This is
Imagine being able to virtually teleport from
the
one space
HoloLens
to another
consultation
in real
example.
time. Hey, Sergio,
Yes,
how does it feel like to be holoported?
it feels great to be holoported.
So if Sergio is to wear his HoloLens device, and I'm going to wear mine, we can see each other in full 3D in real time. We can interact and communicate as if we're co-present. Sergio, can you walk around my space? Can you walk behind this chair? So we're doing everything
see
to
there
give
he
the
has-
impression that
he's seeing-
Sergio and I...
Now you can, when we talk about telemedicine, one of the things that often comes up is how you can't be there with the animal. And you're right, in a lot of ways you can. But there's a lot of ways in which technology is evolving, so we might be able to. You know, there's demos of the HoloLens assisting with plumbing, where you have 2 people working collaboratively. You look at the ability to take these approaches and bring in surgical expertise from across the world in areas where we can't access it, or have an owner and a technician and a veterinarian consulting on a case where they're all present without really being there. And how does that change the ways in which we build relationships with clients? How does that change the ways in which we train our graduates? And when you do that, there's a whole bunch of different ways in which you can introduce sales. And this is some of the examples that Amazon's doing. Right now they have buttons where you press a button, it comes the next day. And so they're installing buttons all over your house, laundry, fridge, etc. So you run out of milk, you press a button and it gets delivered the next day. They're also working with voice technology. This is their product Alexa. Alexa is a speaker that sits in your house. And it's like Siri, but it's just kind of omnipresent in your living room. Now, when it started, it didn't know a whole lot. In the last several months, it's grown to over 1,400 skills, different tasks it can do. In your room, just saying, turn on these lights, book an Uber, and more companies are connecting to these platforms. And so one of the pieces of advice that I provide to companies is, what are the existing tool sets that are out there? As a veterinary profession, we often think that we have to create everything from scratch. But that doesn't have to be the case when big companies are enabling us with tool sets that otherwise we never would have had. So what do we do? These are just a handful of the dozens of examples I could have pulled from of how technology is changing different areas of our lives. And I want to leave you with a few areas in which we can consider. Because the reality is this, right? We like the benefits of these things. We like when we're the customers or users, when we get a better experience. But we don't want to change. We're doing a great job. People love us. We're veterinarians. I think that the veterinary profession has the opportunity to take these tools and build solutions for pet owners that will enable us to offer a level of personalized, precision care that is far more accurate and far more accessible than we ever would have dreamed. And if the goal of veterinarians is to offer the best care possible to the most patients possible, I'm incredibly optimistic and excited about the ways in which technology is going to enable us to do this. But here's a couple strategies that I've considered and talked with that we can look at to actually help achieve these goals. The first is the role of regulation. There are countless examples of companies that have made bigger bets and more successful bets in markets where they were allowed to innovate, in spaces that encouraged them to break things and fail, and didn't penalize them for trying to learn and experiment. Google's self-driving car is a great example. There is a reason it's in California and Nevada. There's a reason that drone testing was done overseas instead of the United States. These are markets where countries and bodies said, we understand and appreciate the ways in which the world's changing, and we want to change with you. And when you open yourself to that sort of conversation, it attracts tremendous interest from the people who today are on the fringes looking to disrupt your market and create a market, a world in which we can collaborate together. The second is targeted learning opportunities. I think that this is really important because today we rely on the curricula to provide training for our veterinary students. And as I hope you can appreciate as we've been going through these examples, this stuff is happening quickly. The role of jobs and how do we prepare a workforce for changing jobs is really important. And one of the models that we can consider is a group, and a model that was pioneered by a group called Udacity. And what they did is they looked at the areas of opportunity where there was jobs that weren't currently being occupied, and they designed these nano degrees. And so what they did is they took a very specific focus, one that the industry themselves were saying, we need people who are qualified in these areas. They put it online, they built a program around it, people paid. If they completed that training, they got half their tuition back, and then they were guaranteed a job when they graduated. And what's really interesting is that the top 10% of the graduates ended up getting jobs at places like Google and Facebook and the people who helped create these courses, because it was pretty much a prolonged job interview if you think about it, right? Google and those groups helped create the really difficult assignments for these students. And it enabled them to be able to understand who were their targets and who were the people they wanted to build the future of their organizations around. And so when you look at areas like genetic counseling, right? We're going to live in a world in which pet owners not just have that, but it's really a decision of whether or not you want to pay a couple bucks to get that information. No veterinarians really know how to incorporate that within practice. The last couple points are around entrepreneurship. And Nick talked about this as well. How can we build in this entrepreneurial mindset to graduating students? How can we give them the freedom to fail? How can we put them in safe zones where they aren't being simply evaluated on multiple choice tests? And how can we enable earlier collisions with practices so that we're actually designing solutions that work? I think every veterinary practice will tell you that they've worked with technologies before that just plain didn't do a good job. And so what we need to do is foster earlier collaboration between the companies that are building those tools and the people that ultimately will use them. And the last is we need to focus on taking industry problems and presenting them as challenges for collaboration. Really quickly, this is a group of students that we worked with when we were developing a solution with IBM Watson, training algorithms to think like a veterinarian. And we turned it into a game and an exercise for the students. One afternoon, we brought them in. In 5 hours, they exceeded our internal team's capacity by orders of magnitude. They did a great job. They reported the training as valuable to their learning, and then we hired a quarter of the veterinary college overnight. And over the course of the next several months, we became the largest IBM Watson partner in the world from a training standpoint. We need to think creatively about how we can position some of these tools as opportunities for both the next and the current generation of practices. This is my favorite slide. This is when they broke Google Docs, Google Sheets, sorry. You can see at the bottom all the tabs that they have open. 80 students collaborating in real time, designing question and answer pairs, things that they as veterinarians would want a computer to help them answer. And then we plugged that into the supercomputer, to the system. And there's already organizations doing these types of work and understanding these conversations in the healthcare space. So there's models that we can adapt. And so again, there's several ways in which we can work to help bring about the future that we've been describing. And lastly, I'll leave you with this. I want us to turn us into a generation of practitioners that are not merely passengers in these future, but are rather the people creating the cars of the next 20, 30 years. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Adam. When we met, I knew that it was going to be an interesting session, that if we could get it together. And I mean, we're a regulator, and what do regulators like to do? They like to control things. But I think the message that we're getting is that those that try and control the march of technology and progress fail, and actually usually fail very miserably. And that the veterinary profession is going to need to embrace technology, and us as a regulator are going to need to help the profession to do that while still protecting and hopefully enhancing animal welfare. So a really important message. You also gave a very strong personal aspect to your talk, which was nice. I'm sorry to hear about the atrial fibrillation. Delighted that you survived till the end. You also appears, I was looking at your record there, your alcohol flush reaction. It said does not flush. I don't know what that means, but I hope that it's good news, because we have a little gift for you as a thank you, and I suppose one thing I would say is do not flush.